I remember the exact shade of the sky when I arrived at my sister's wedding. A soft, powdery blue stretching across the lake like a promise I knew wouldn't be kept. The resort was stunning, nestled in the heart of Vermont like a hidden postcard. The gardens were perfectly trimmed, every flower blooming on cue, and the glass banquet hall sparkled under the late afternoon sun. It felt like walking into a movie scene, the kind where everyone knows their role. Everyone but me. I had taken extra care that morning. My burgundy dress fit like it had been made for me. It was the one thing that gave me even a little confidence. I'd curl my hair, dabbed on some lipstick, and even worn the heels I usually avoided. I wasn't trying to outshine anyone. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted to celebrate my little sister, smile for some pictures, and maybe have one slow dance with Dad, the way we used to when I was younger. But the day didn't start with a dance or even a smile. When I arrived at the front desk to check in for the reception, a young woman with a high bun and tablet in hand greeted me with a practiced smile. "Your name, please?" "Mary Evans," I said, trying to keep my voice light and cheerful. Her fingers tapped quickly, then paused. I saw it, the hesitation in her eyes. She blinked, forced her smile wider, and said, yes, here you are. Table 17. It's just outside this hallway next to the coat check." "Excuse me?" I asked, my smile faltering. "Outside? Are you sure?" "Yes, miss, that's where your name card is," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Right by the window. Lovely view. Lovely view." As if that made up for being seated away from everyone else, near where people came to grab their coats and leave. Still, I nodded and walked toward the lonely table tucked off to the side. It was small, round, with a single white chair and a folded name card that read Mary Evans, Table H. No centerpiece. No champagne flutes. Just a glass of water and a clear view of the hallway. I sat down, suddenly very aware of how quiet everything felt where I was. Through the wide glass doors, I could see guests entering the main banquet hall, laughing, hugging, glowing. Their heels clicked across the marble, their perfumes mixed in the air, and flower petals trailed behind them like confetti. I sat alone with the sound of the coat-room door opening and closing, every breeze bringing with it a whiff of cold air and unfamiliar cologne. After what felt like forever, I stood up and walked toward the banquet hall. I needed to see someone I knew. Someone who might help me feel like I belonged. Inside, the room was golden literally. Warm light spilled from chandeliers that hung like stars, and the glass ceiling made it all shimmer. Ellie stood by the head table, radiant in her lace gown, her dark hair twisted into an elegant bun. Mom stood beside her, whispering something that made them both laugh. I hesitated, then walked up to them. My mother's perfume hit me first, rose and vanilla, the same scent she'd worn since I was a kid. "Mom," I said gently, touching her elbow. "They sat me outside, next to the coat check. I was wondering if maybe that's where your name card was, right?" she said without even turning fully to face me. "Well, yes, but..." "Then that's your seat," she snapped, her smile tightening as she turned back to Ellie. "We have a lot of guests, Mary. Just be happy you were invited." The words hit harder than I expected. Be happy I was invited? I looked at Ellie, hoping for some kind of reaction. Even a raised eyebrow. But she just smirked and shrugged. "There aren't any extra chairs at our table," she said, like she was explaining a math problem. "It's not that deep." It wasn't that deep to them. I backed away quietly and scanned the room. Maybe Dad would understand. He always used to have a soft spot for me. When I got my heart broken in 10th grade, he brought me ice cream without asking. When I failed my driver's test, he let me drive circles in the school parking lot until I got it right. He stood by the bar now, swirling a drink in his hand. His tie was a little loose, his face unreadable. "Dad," I said, my voice barely louder than the music. "They sat me outside. I just thought maybe..." He glanced over, but didn't look at me. "It's just a seat, Mary. Don't make it a thing." That was all. No follow-up. No concern. No offer to speak to someone. Just dismissal. I nodded, numb, and turned to leave the room. My heels clicked against the floor, echoing louder than the music. Each step reminded me that this place wasn't mine. This family wasn't mine, not in the way I kept hoping it would be. I went back to the small round table and sat by the window again. The lake was catching the last rays of sunlight. The sky was still that soft, broken blue. And my reflection in the glass looked older, more tired, like someone who had spent a lifetime trying to be seen by people who were never going to turn their heads. I thought of birthdays forgotten, of phone calls never returned, of group pictures where I was always standing at the edge, cropped out when someone needed space. I used to make excuses for them. Mom's busy, Ellie's the baby, Dad's just tired. But as I sat there, watching the sun dip behind the trees, something in me shifted. It wasn't a sudden collapse. It wasn't a loud break. It was quiet, like a truth I had known all along, but never said out loud. Maybe I didn't belong here. Not just today. Not ever. The music from inside grew louder, and I knew Ellie was making her grand entrance. She'd be walking in, arm hooked through Dad's, all eyes on her. Applause would follow.
Cheers.
Champagne flutes clinking. And I was sitting in the hallway with a glass of water. I turned back to the lake and took a deep breath. The air smelled like lilacs and something faintly burnt from the kitchen vents. It didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm. I picked up the place card again. Mary Evans, Table H. It looked so official, like it was meant to mark my spot. But really, it marked everything I had felt my whole life.
Separate.
Unnecessary. Extra. I slid the card into my clutch, not out of sentiment, but because something told me I'd want to remember this moment. Not for the pain, but for the clarity. And with the sun setting and my family inside pretending I didn't exist, I leaned back in my chair and let the silence hold me. It did a better job than they ever had. I had arrived early, earlier than anyone else, even the staff, it seemed. The morning air was cool and still, and the silence inside the house felt almost sacred. Everyone was still asleep, and for a moment, I was grateful for that. It gave me time to move through the halls like a ghost, unobserved, unbothered. My feet took me upstairs on instinct to the room that used to be mine. Nothing much had changed. The walls were the same pale cream, the carpet slightly frayed in the corner by the door, just like it had always been. The posters I used to hang up, my sketches, my magazine cutouts, were gone now. But the faint square outlines where the sun had faded the paint around the tape marks were still visible. A quiet kind of echo from the past. I walked to the old wooden desk in the corner, running my fingers along its edge. I used to spend hours here, sketching, journaling, pretending I was building a life that extended beyond these walls. On a whim, I opened the top drawer, expecting it to be empty. Instead, I found a soft leather-bound notebook tucked inside. It wasn't mine. I knew the handwriting right away. Neat, slanted, unmistakably Mom's. The front cover simply read, "Notes." There was no lock. No attempt to keep it hidden. Just a plain brown journal left behind as if it held nothing more than grocery lists. Still, something inside me hesitated. I shouldn't read it. I knew that. But my fingers moved on their own. Page after page. Entry after entry. And every single one, every word, every thought, was about Ellie. Ellie's recital dress came in today. She looked like a princess. Ellie cried after her first breakup. We stayed up all night, just talking. Ellie got accepted into that summer arts program. I'm so proud of her. There were dozens more. Notes about Ellie's favorite meals, her fears, her victories, and her friendships. I flipped through the entire thing, desperately scanning for something, anything about me. But there was nothing. Not a single sentence. Not one mention. It felt like the notebook was burning my hands. I closed it and held it to my chest, stunned. I don't know how long I stood there, breathing through the hurt. It was the kind of pain that didn't come all at once. It dripped in slowly, like water through a crack, until your whole foundation is soaked. I carried it downstairs with me. My hands were trembling. My voice, too. Mom was standing in the kitchen, stirring a pot of something fragrant. She looked up, casual as ever. Where did you find that? She asked lightly, but I could hear the alertness behind her tone. In my old room, I said.
I
I read some of it. She didn't speak right away. Her eyebrows lifted in surprise, then slowly lowered. Her face softened, not with concern, but something closer to pity. Oh, honey, she said gently. You were always so independent. Ellie needed to be reminded. You didn't. She said it with such calm finality, like that should explain everything. It made perfect sense that I didn't exist on the pages of her memory because I was just fine without her. Her words didn't slap. They sliced, quiet and clean. I didn't say another word the rest of the day. I sat at the table while they laughed, shared stories, and passed the mashed potatoes like I wasn't even there. I watched Ellie lean her head on Mom's shoulder, and I watched Mom glow with affection. I was the extra guest in my own childhood home. I left early the next morning, before sunrise, before anyone woke up. I didn't want goodbyes. No one texted to ask why. Now, sitting outside Ellie's wedding hall, the memory of that day played on loop in my mind. I stared at the name card in my hand, Table H, hallway area. It wasn't just a seat. It was a message, a summary of my place in this family, a reflection of that journal, that Thanksgiving dinner, every forgotten birthday, every time I was called too dramatic for crying or too sensitive for noticing, every time my name was left out of their stories. I used to make excuses. I'd tell myself they loved me, they just didn't know how to show it. Or maybe they loved me differently, quieter. But deep down, I had always known. They didn't see me, and over the years, I stopped trying to be seen.
It was easier that way.
Less painful, like slipping into the shadows where I couldn't be hurt again. But today, with this name card in my lap and the sound of wedding music echoing through the glass doors, I realized something. Being invisible never stopped hurting. I had just gotten better at pretending it didn't.
Until now.
I was still lost in thought when I heard my name spoken softly, almost with hesitation. Madeline. I turned, startled, and saw Ethan the groom, standing a few feet away. His black tux was slightly wrinkled, his tie loose, and his face carried none of the joy I expected to see on his wedding day. He looked burdened. Hey, I said, rising slowly. Everything okay? He gave a short, tired laugh. That's the thing, I don't know. I've been feeling off. Since this morning. Actually, since last week. And now, he rubbed the back of his neck, his voice trailing off. I just needed to talk to someone who might see things. I blinked, confused. Why me? He hesitated for a long beat. Then he said, because you're not trying to impress anyone here. You're not pretending. And I think you've seen more than you let on. That caught me off guard. It wasn't a compliment exactly, but it felt like one. Or maybe it just felt like someone had finally noticed I was in the room. I nodded slowly and gestured to the empty chair across from me. He didn't sit. I don't want to dump this on you, I swear, he said, still standing. But lately, Ellie's been different.
Distant.
Controlling. Like this whole wedding isn't about love. It's about her getting everything exactly how she wants. And if it's not, she breaks things, I said quietly before I could stop myself. His eyes widened.
Yeah.
Exactly. I sighed. You're not imagining it, Ethan. I wish you were. His jaw clenched. I've been telling myself it's just nerves. That every bride gets a little intense before the big day. But this, it's more than that, isn't it?
He didn't need me to answer.
He saw it in my face. Before we could say anything else, another voice called out. Ethan. We turned to see Celeste, his mother, standing just a few steps away. She held her phone loosely in one hand, but her gaze was razor-sharp. She was calm, composed, and aware that something was wrong. Even from a distance, her presence made me sit straighter. Celeste had always carried herself like a woman who noticed everything. And today it looked like she had. I need to show you something, Celeste said softly, stepping closer to her son. Her voice wasn't sharp or panicked, but calm, almost too calm, like she was holding herself together just enough to make it through what had to be said. And I need you to stay calm. Ethan's brow furrowed, but he didn't argue. He held out his hand. Celeste placed her phone in his palm, her fingers brushing his with a silent kind of urgency. I watched as he tapped the screen, unlocking whatever truth she was about to unveil. His eyes moved across the screen. Then again, slower this time. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled slightly around the phone. I saw the shift in his body, the way his breath stilled, the color drained from his face. His hands began to tremble. "They're messages," Celeste said gently, stepping back to give him space. "Ellie sent them to her stylist and a friend."
This isn't hearsay, Ethan.
"She bragged about using your last argument to guilt you into proposing earlier, about manipulating you into choosing this venue, even though you said it felt out of place." Ethan still didn't speak. "She called you harmlessly gullible," Celeste added, her voice quiet but firm. She laughed about it. His lips parted slightly. I could see him trying to find the words, but nothing came out. I rose from my seat, uncertain whether I should offer comfort or let him have his moment. My heart was pounding. I wasn't sure what shocked me more, that Ellie had said these things, or that someone was finally believing me. Believing what I'd sensed about her for years. "There's more," Celeste said, pulling a second phone from her purse. I confronted her about it. She laughed. Said I was being dramatic. Said, "That's just how girls talk." "She's not who I thought she was," Ethan finally said, his voice cracking with disbelief. "No," Celeste agreed, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "She isn't. But you're still the man you were yesterday. And you deserve to make this decision with clear eyes. That's why I came to you now. And that's why I trust Madeline." She turned to me, her gaze warm but resolute. "Thank you for not turning away." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the bitter older sister, or the outsider imagining things. I was believed. Ethan looked between the two of us. There was a storm in his eyes, but beneath it, a quiet strength was building. He stood taller, straighter. "I need to talk to her," he said at last. "I need to hear what she says when she knows I know." Celeste nodded. "She's upstairs with the photographer. I'll give them a heads up."
He turned to me.
"Will you come? I think I might need backup." I blinked. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure of anything right now," he admitted. "But I trust you." So we walked together, side by side, up the sweeping spiral staircase. The house was massive, opulent, every painting on the walls, every expensive flower arrangement screaming perfection. But beneath all that beauty, the tension was thick and suffocating. My heart thudded louder with each step. But it wasn't just anxiety, it was something else. Validation. A sense of being seen after years of being invisible. For once, I wasn't just background noise. I was part of something real. At the top of the stairs, sunlight poured in through arched windows, casting golden shadows on the hardwood floors. A long table stood against one wall, lined with untouched desserts meant for the bridal party. The room was silent, like it was holding its breath. Ethan paced slowly, fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. I stood near the doorway, hands trembling slightly, ready for whatever came next. Then the door opened. Ellie walked in like a vision, radiant in her wedding gown, hair perfectly curled, makeup untouched by even a single smudge. She was glowing, smiling, until she saw our faces. The smile vanished. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tight, her eyes flicking between Ethan and me. "Why are you up here? People are asking where you are." Ethan didn't waste time. "Ellie, we need to talk." She crossed her arms, already on edge. "If this is about the flowers again, I swear." "It's not about flowers," he cut in. "It's about everything." Her brows knitted. "What are you talking about?" "I've seen the messages," he said. His voice was low, even. "The ones you sent to your stylist. To your friend. The things you said about guilt-tripping me. About controlling every part of this day. About how easy it was to get me to do what you wanted." The color drained from her face. Who showed you those?" she stammered. "I did," Celeste said, appearing behind her. Ellie spun. "You had no right," I had every right, Celeste replied, calm as ever. You're marrying my son. Or you were. Footsteps echoed behind Celeste. Robert and Caroline, our parents, appeared in the doorway. For once, they stood side by side, but their faces weren't proud. They looked tired. Hollow. Mom, Ellie said, her voice trembling. Caroline didn't rush to her defense. She didn't even soften. I thought it was nerves. Wedding stress. But this is something else.
Dad.
Ellie turned toward him, but Robert didn't speak. He just looked at her with eyes full of quiet disappointment. Celeste stepped forward. You've been lying, manipulating, playing with people's trust for your convenience. And it ends now. Ellie whirled on me, rage flickering in her eyes. This is your fault.
You've always been jealous of me.
You couldn't stand that someone wanted me. You're fake. You're a bitter, lonely nobody. I took a deep breath. I don't need to tear anyone down, Ellie. The truth did the work for me. She looked like she wanted to scream, but instead, she turned back to Ethan, desperate now, eyes pleading. You're annulling the wedding? She whispered. I already did, he replied, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. Everything's inside. The officiant knows. I'm sorry, Ellie, but I'm done pretending. She stared at the envelope like it might disappear. Her hand shook as she reached out, but didn't touch it. No, she whispered. You can't do this to me. Not today. Ethan didn't flinch. Ellie, he said softly, you already did it to yourself. And for the first time since I arrived, the room fell into silence, not of tension, but of clarity. Everything had changed. I didn't do this, Ethan said gently, meeting Ellie's wide, panicked eyes. You did. And with that, he turned and walked out, Celeste by his side. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. Just stepped forward into the quiet that comes after a storm, leaving behind the woman he was supposed to marry and the chaos she created. Ellie stood frozen in place, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow bursts. Her fingers clenched around the envelope he'd left behind. The annulment. The undoing of everything she thought she had under control. Then, in a sudden burst of movement, she whipped around and stormed out of the room. The hem of her gown swirled violently around her heels. The envelope crumpled in her hand like tissue. I followed her, not because I wanted to witness the fallout, but because I knew this wasn't the kind of storm that stayed contained. It was going to hit everyone. And I wasn't hiding anymore. By the time I reached the reception hall, Ellie was already in the center of the room. Music stopped mid-chord. Conversations cut off, like someone had yanked the sound out of the air. All eyes turned. Ellie's dress shimmered under the chandeliers, her hair still perfectly pinned, but her expression was unraveling by the second. Tears glistened in her eyes, her lips parted in disbelief, her hand still clutching that crumpled envelope. He's walking out, she shouted, too loudly, her voice cracking. He thinks he can just humiliate me like this. That this paper means something. Guests looked at one another in stunned silence. A few raised their phones, uncertain whether to record or respect the moment. The whispers started immediately, spreading like ripples in still water. But Ethan didn't respond. He didn't even pause. He walked straight through the grand double doors and out into the sunlit courtyard, his stride steady, shoulders back. Celeste followed close behind, her expression unreadable, composed but heavy. And me? I stood at the edge of the room, my back to the door, watching the spectacle unfold, watching the mask fall. Ellie, once the golden child, the flawless bride, the one everyone praised, was unraveling. The image she had built so carefully was collapsing in front of the very audience she had always tried to impress. And this time, no one came to her defense.
Not Mom.
Not Dad. Not even the friends she'd clung to for status and shine. She was alone in the center of a room full of people, just like I had been for most of my life. It had been a week since the wedding that wasn't. The bouquet I had somehow ended up with still sat in a chipped water glass on my kitchen counter. The petals had started to wilt, curling inwards, the pink tips turning brown. I should have thrown it away. It wasn't mine, but something about it felt symbolic. like it belonged to a version of myself I was finally ready to say goodbye to. The calls started the very next morning. For missed ones from Mom. Then a long voicemail, her voice high and tight, accusing me of betrayal, of ruining the most important day of Ellie's life, of twisting everything to make myself the victim. Then came the texts, paragraphs of dramatic blame, barely any punctuation, each one ending with a variation of, "I hope you're happy now." I didn't answer. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to explain myself, or defend my actions, or beg to be understood. I let the silence do the work. In my small Boston apartment, I curled up under a throw blanket with a steaming mug of chamomile tea. The city moved quietly outside my window, cars passing, neighbors walking dogs, life going on. Inside, there were no insults, no comparisons, no fake smiles. Just me. I wasn't lonely. I was free. That day, I finally pulled out a box I had kept under my bed for years. A time capsule of memories I'd both cherished and resented. Inside were photo albums, birthday cards with uneven handwriting, a necklace Ellie had broken when we were kids and promised to fix, but never did. There were printed text messages too, screenshots from conversations where I had reached out, apologized, and tried to bridge the gap. Proof, I used to think. Proof that I had tried. That I had mattered. I flipped through the album slowly. For once, I wasn't scanning every group photo to find myself, to check if I'd been cropped out or if I was standing on the edge again. I didn't count how many captions mentioned Ellie and how many didn't mention me at all. I just looked, and then I closed the box. I didn't burn it. I didn't tear anything up. I simply slid the lid back on and pushed it into the back of the closet. Not out of anger, but out of peace. A few hours later, my phone buzzed.
Dad.
I stared at the screen. I hadn't heard from him since the wedding. Part of me didn't want to answer, but I did. "Hi," I said quietly.
Hi, Maddie.
His voice cracked. "I've been thinking about everything." I stayed silent, letting the pause hang. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one. Not the kind of people who say to ease their guilt. I watched what happened. I saw what you went through. And I saw what we let Ellie do. I just didn't know how blind I'd been until I saw it all laid out." Another pause. "Thank you," I said. "But I don't need an apology." He didn't reply right away. "I need freedom," I added. And I meant it. I wasn't asking for a seat at their table anymore. I was building my own. That night, I opened my laptop and booked a train ticket to Maine. No particular reason. No event or person is waiting for me. Just a quiet town by the ocean, a good book tucked in my bag, and a version of myself I hadn't seen in a long time. One that didn't shrink, didn't beg, didn't search for scraps of approval. 2 days later, I stood by the Charles River, zipped into a navy coat, the wind tugging at my hair. The water moved gently beneath the bridge, and the city breathed behind me. I took a long breath and closed my eyes. And I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who waited by doorways, hoping someone would invite her in. The one who smiled through tears and swallowed every slight just to keep the peace. She was gone now. Family isn't always the people who share your name or your blood. Sometimes, it's the ones who show up when the music stops. Who sees your value even when you're sitting alone by the coat check. Who doesn't need you to shrink so they can shine. Sometimes, family is just you finally choosing yourself. I looked down at the river one last time, then turned to leave. And what I felt wasn't sadness. It wasn't regret. It was freedom. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Not to run, but to finally find yourself.